Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. A U.S.-Iran agreement to extend the ceasefire between the two countries has reportedly been signed and is now in effect, days ahead of a planned in-person ceremony in Switzerland. Under the 14-point deal, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, in exchange for sanctions relief and a $300 billion reconstruction fund. The U.S. Federal Reserve has kept interest rates steady, but signaled a more hawkish outlook, with 9 Fed members indicating they expect rates to be raised before the end of the year. The move sent stocks lower and boosted the U.S. dollar against major currencies. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has wrapped up his 10-day trip to Europe. Before returning home, he joined world leaders for talks on global economic imbalances, and briefly met with U.S. President Donald Trump and discussed efforts to maintain peace on the Korean Peninsula. The United States and Iran have reportedly signed a ceasefire deal ahead of schedule, opening a 60-day window for nuclear talks while restoring shipping through the Strait of Hormuz. Our Oh Soo-young starts us off.
The United States and Iran appear to have inched closer to implementing their ceasefire agreement after both sides remotely signed a memorandum of understanding aimed at ending the conflict and reopening the Strait of Hormuz. According to U.S. officials cited by Axios, President Donald Trump signed the document on Wednesday, days ahead of a planned in-person ceremony in Switzerland. Earlier on Wednesday, the Trump administration released a full text of the 14-point memorandum agreed by Washington and Tehran, declaring an immediate and permanent end to military operations, including in Lebanon. The U.S. will begin lifting its maritime blockade immediately, while Iran will work to restore the free movement of commercial vessels through the critical Strait of Hormuz and return shipping levels to normal. Iran will remove mines and coordinate with Gulf states on the future management of the waterway. The two sides also agreed to a 60-day negotiating period aimed at reaching a broader agreement on Iran's nuclear program. Tehran also reaffirmed that it will not develop nuclear weapons, while both sides agreed to negotiate the future of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile under the oversight of the International Atomic Energy Agency. In return, Washington is offering significant economic incentives, including sanctions relief, waivers for Iranian oil exports, and a proposed reconstruction and development package worth at least $300 billion. Speaking in France after the agreement was unveiled, Trump made clear that any economic benefits would depend on Iranian compliance. He warned that if Tehran fails to honor the agreement or refuses to reach a final nuclear settlement, Washington could resume military action.
And it's a memorandum of understanding. If it doesn't get done in 60 days, that's all right. We go back to bombing. You know, I don't want to do that because it's so good. But we might have to, because we're never going to let them have a nuclear weapon.
Trump said the deal also sidesteps a catastrophe for the global economy and renewed turmoil in energy markets. The focus now shifts to Switzerland, where U.S. and Iranian negotiators are expected to begin talks on a comprehensive agreement covering Iran's nuclear program, sanctions relief, and regional security issues. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
The U.S. Federal Reserve has left interest rates unchanged but signaled a more hawkish outlook, with several policymakers expecting rates to move higher before the end of the year. The prospect of tighter monetary policy rattled financial markets, sending stocks lower, Treasury yields higher, and boosting the U.S. dollar. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
The U.S. Federal Reserve on Wednesday left its benchmark interest rate unchanged at 3.5 to 3.75%, marking its 4th consecutive meeting without a rate move and its first policy decision under new chair Kevin Warsh. The Federal Open Market Committee unanimously voted to keep rates steady as policymakers assessed the economic impact of the ongoing U.S.-Israeli war against Iran and a recent surge in inflation.
As you saw a few moments ago, the committee decided to maintain the target range for the Fed funds rate at 3.5% to 3.75% in support of the Fed's dual mandate. Economic activity is expanding at a solid pace, despite elevated uncertainty that owes in part to the conflict in the Middle East.
While the Fed held rates steady for now, its latest projections signaled a more hawkish outlook. The median forecast indicates that the federal funds rate will end the year at 3.8%, higher than the 3.4% projected in March. In addition, 9 of the 19 Fed officials indicated they expect interest rates to be higher by the end of the year. Warsh did not submit a projection in the Fed's closely watched dot plot. Wall Street on Wednesday reacted negatively to the prospect of tighter monetary policy. U.S. stocks closed sharply lower, with the Dow Jones Industrial Average falling 0.97%. The S&P 500 dropped 1.21%, while the Nasdaq Composite lost 1.34%. Treasury yields moved higher as investors increased their bets on a rate hike later this year. The yield on the 2-year Treasury note jumped 17 basis points to 4.21%, while the benchmark 10-year yield rose to 4.499%. The stronger rate outlook also boosted the U.S. dollar. The dollar index, which tracks the greenback against 6 major currencies, climbed 0.9% to 100.45. The Fed's latest decision suggests policymakers remain cautious about inflation risks, while markets are increasingly preparing for the possibility of higher borrowing costs in the months ahead. 이승재, Arirang News.
And now for more on the Fed's rate decision, we're joined today by Greg Busha, Professor of Finance at the Stanford Graduate School of Business, Stanford University. Professor Busha, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So this was Kevin Warsh's first policy meeting as Fed chair. What do you make of the Fed's rate decision?
So Kevin Warsh, he was just confirmed as Fed chair. He replaced Jerome Powell. Trump had kind of been fighting publicly with Powell really over a lot of these Fed rate decisions. So it's really interesting to see this. Powell's term expired. Warsh was Trump's pick. But he's sort of widely viewed as being very qualified, professional, very independent. And I kind of would expect, given the current situation that I think we'll get into in a little bit, he very well may break with the president's desire for lower rates. So his reputation is as an inflation hawk, meaning there's some expectation he'll be more aggressive at managing inflation. And with that said, today the Fed held rates steady. They targeted a range of 3.5 to 3.75%. And one of the things that Warsh emphasized was price stability, which suggests the Fed is going to be taking inflation very seriously in the coming months. And that's really what I was expecting, and I think that's sort of what the broader market was expecting too.
I see 9 Fed members indicated they expect to raise interest rates by the end of the year. This is a significant change in sentiment from the Fed's previous projection, right?
That's right. So the Fed thinking is sort of trading off unemployment versus inflation. That's kind of the dual mandate that Chairman Warsh referenced in his remarks. Now, lower rates, they tend to spur investment, hiring, spending. They kind of make asset prices like stock prices or home prices increase. And higher rates do the opposite. So sort of the thinking at the Fed and among economists is when the labor market's weak, you want to lower rates. When inflation is too high, you want to raise rates to kind of cool things off. Now, like the unemployment situation is pretty good. There's a 4.3% unemployment rate. That's kind of on the lower side. There was recently a fairly positive jobs number in May. People have for a while kind of been waiting for the bottom to fall out of the US labor market, but so far it's kind of held on. On the other hand, inflation is too high. Okay, the Fed's kind of long-term target is around 2% year over year. And for the past few years, it's been stubbornly in this kind of 2.5 to 3% range. And actually, there have been market increases since March. And actually, the latest monthly number was 4.2% year over year. And that's really far outside of the Fed's target. And that kind of unambiguously calls for rate increases.
I see. And as for other major economies, Japan's central bank has increased its main interest rate to a new 31-year high following a surge in global energy prices. And this, comes after the European Central Bank raised rates last week. So what do these decisions suggest about the current state of the global economy, and how could they affect the Fed's decision moving forward?
Yeah, I think this really reflects kind of a global economy that's concerned about high energy prices, partly coming from what's going on in the Middle East. Energy prices are high worldwide, and it's kind of the natural central bank reaction to raise interest rates in response to that. Now, raising interest rates doesn't magically fix sort of the conflict in the Middle East, but it can clamp down on sort of energy demand in the short run and keep inflation from settling in. Again, sort of raising rates tends to reduce spending. If there's less energy that people can buy, then we want to make people want to buy less, and that will keep prices down. Now, the Japan thing, it's always sort of notable when Japan raises rates in particular. They famously spent something like 30 years at essentially 0% interest rates, and their breaking from that is pretty significant. Now, like as for how this impacts the Fed's decision, I would view this more as providing kind of external data to the Fed. The idea is that many countries are sort of concerned about higher prices. This suggests that the Fed should also be concerned about it. I think unlike a lot of smaller countries like Japan or Korea, the US doesn't really face a lot of pressure to follow or keep pace with other central banks' rate decisions. For a country like Korea, this is really important because interest rate differentials dramatically impact exchange rates, they impact currency flows. When you're a relatively small economy that relies a lot on exports, this is a huge deal for you. Now, and it really constrains what the central bank can do. That doesn't apply so much to the US because really the US is so large and so much trade is invoiced in US dollars anyway. Exposure to other countries' policy rates is a lot lower.
And all this comes as, the Trump administration announced details of the agreement to end the conflict with Iran. Many analysts expect that it's unlikely that oil and gas prices will return to pre-war levels for months, even if the Strait of Hormuz reopens. But could the deal still provide some relief for global energy markets?
Yeah, I think it's sort of going to reduce risk premia a little bit and provide some relief. Now, kind of broader context, oil prices peaked at about $100 per barrel. They haven't really been above this, and they've come down a lot, even as the conflict has been ongoing. And I think a question you could ask is why haven't they been higher? Why haven't they increased as the conflict hasn't resolved? So I think first, countries like the US and China, they've been tapping into their strategic oil reserves. Okay, so the US just has a lot of oil that's saved up, and they can deploy oil from that to kind of dampen these supply shocks. Okay, so these reserves, they run out eventually, but so far they've been sort of keeping prices from getting really out of control. Second, I think it's important to remember people are super adaptable. There are other routes, either in the long run or the short run, to going through the strait. At a certain price point for oil, these alternate routes or alternate technologies for transferring oil become more feasible, and that's going to keep a lid on prices. Also, there's alternative sources of energy. Like, for example, I have an electric car, so I just haven't really felt this directly. People respond to these price incentives by sort of substituting away from really expensive routes or expensive energy. And then I think third, markets are already sort of pricing in an end to the conflict to some extent. So we're not going to see a huge oil price reaction as sort of things play out as people expect them to play out. Now, that's all to say, prices are still about $15 to $20 above their pre-conflict levels. I'd expect them to decline a little bit, but there probably isn't a ton of room for them to fall dramatically. I'll also just say, at this point, until we see the sort of the truce more established, I'm a little bit skeptical that this deal will really open the straits to shipping traffic in the long term. I think it a little bit remains to be seen whether it will hold or not.
I see. We'll have to see how that plays out. All right, Professor Bushak, thanks for coming on today. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Take care.
President Lee Jae-myung is on his way back to Korea after attending this year's G7 summit in France. On Wednesday, he joined world leaders for discussions on global economic imbalances, sustainable growth, and artificial intelligence. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin has a wrap-up.
The final day of this year's G7 summit began with the working session on reviving a balanced, shared, and sustainable economic growth for all. Speaking at Wednesday's session, President Lee Jae-myung said global economic imbalances should be tackled through dialogue and solidarity rather than blame. He also called for a stronger cooperation to strengthen the resilience of global energy supply chains as the war in the Middle East has fueled concerns over oil supplies and inflation.
President Lee proposed that energy importing countries, particularly those in the Asia-Pacific region, move beyond responding individually and strengthen practical cooperation through information sharing, early warning systems, emergency coordination, and efforts to stabilize oil and petroleum product supply chains.
The session was followed by a working lunch where world leaders and tech giants discussed artificial intelligence. President Yi emphasized the importance of narrowing the global AI divide while ensuring AI remains safe, transparent, and accountable. Korea endorsed 7 of the 8 documents adopted during the 2-day meeting of the G7 members and 5 invited countries. Leading up to the G7, attention was on whether President Yi would hold a bilateral meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump on the sidelines. Although no official summit took place, the Blue House said on Wednesday that the two leaders exchanged views on the Korea-U.S. alliance and the Korean Peninsula over Tuesday's gala dinner.
President Trump reaffirmed his strong commitment to playing whatever role is necessary to advance peace on the Korean Peninsula and said he would remain in close communication with President Yi on the matter.
Posting a photo of himself with Trump on X, Yi wrote that the two had a candid 90-minute discussion that produced meaningful progress. He added that President Trump had invited him and First Lady Kim Hae-kyung to play golf. After returning to Korea on Thursday, President Yi is expected to shift his focus back to domestic affairs. On Friday, he will chair a meeting with his top aides to review the country's summer emergency preparedness. 송유진, Arirang News.
And President Lee Jae-myung has also held his first summit with Kenyan President Ruto on the sidelines of the G7 summit. The two leaders agreed on Wednesday to deepen cooperation in economic development, infrastructure, and people-to-people exchanges. President Ruto praised Korea's rapid rise to an advanced economy, saying Kenya hopes to learn from Korea's experience. He replied that Korea stands ready to be a reliable partner in Kenya's development. Both countries attended this year's G7 summit as invited partners. Korea is no longer just a culture to view online, with the Korean wave making it something they can now experience firsthand. From K-food and K-beauty to K-pop, one event in Paris is showcasing what Korea has to offer. Our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo reports.
To get a bowl of Korean ramen and tteokbokki, you need to join a long queue in France. At least that's the case this week at K-Expo, being held as Korea and France celebrate 140 years of diplomatic ties.
One of the fastest ways to understand a culture is through its food, and here at the K-Expo, people just don't see Korea, they taste it. From instant tteokbokki, spicy ramen, to seafood specialties from Korea's coastlines, this food zone is bringing Korean flavors straight to Paris.
We can experience really, I think, the whole culture. I feel like there's more and more exhibitions and fair about Korea, mostly in Paris, but maybe it should be not only in Paris.
Demand was so high that some food booths ran out of products hours before closing time. At the beauty zone, visitors lined up to try Korean skincare products and receive personalized consultations.
If I wake up tomorrow and my skin feels good, I will try to find the product or a similar one. There's a lot of shops in Paris, so it's really easy to find the K-beauty products here.
The energy continued in the evening with the K-pop concert featuring 6 acts, including Monsta X and NCT Wish, drawing thousands of fans. A2 Major also held a mini fan meeting, giving fans a chance to meet the group up close.
I tried my chance to go to the fan site, but sadly I wasn't selected. So I just came here to see them because even though I wasn't chosen since I really like them a lot. I just seeing them is already a lot for me.
For organizers, the event is about creating stronger cultural ties between the two countries.
I hope this serves as an opportunity for young people in France to gain a deeper understanding of Korean culture beyond what they've seen so far. As the government and private sector continue to expand exchanges, I believe that by the time we celebrate the 150th anniversary, Korea and France will feel less like distant countries and more like close neighbours.
The cultural exchange is also generating business opportunities. Organizers have set a business consultation target of $400 million, connecting Korean companies with European buyers and turning cultural interest into economic opportunity. Business meetings continue through Friday as Korea looks to further expand the global reach of K-culture into business partnerships. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News, Paris.
South Africa will be without a key player for the rest of the World Cup group stage as midfielder Zwane has been handed a 3-match suspension after being sent off in South Africa's opening match against Mexico. FIFA announced the ban on Wednesday, citing the serious foul play that led to Zwane's red card. Unless South Africa wins an appeal, he will miss the team's next match against Czech Republic on June 19th and their final Group A match against South Korea on June 25th. The suspension is a major setback for South Africa as the team pushes for a place in the knockout rounds.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu faces voter anger heading into an election this autumn as the interim U.S. deal with Iran ended the war long before Israel's goals were achieved. Netanyahu confirmed this week he will run again in an election that must be called by October. Opinion polls put his right-wing coalition on course to lose. President Trump chose to end the wars in Iran and Lebanon before Israel achieved lasting victories. Netanyahu also faces corruption charges and criticism over the security failings of the October 2023 Hamas attack. Opposition leader Yair Lapid said Netanyahu lost the war and collapsed at the moment of truth. 1 month after the World Health Organization declared Congo's Ebola outbreak an international emergency, the number of confirmed cases has reached 800, with warnings that the outbreak could become the worst on record. Tens of thousands of contacts remain untraced. A WHO report found roughly a third of new case alerts in the worst-hit province of Ituri were going unanswered. Burial and decontamination teams also say they have only about 15% of the personnel and 7% of the vehicles they need. Dozens of medics have caught the Bundibugyo strain, for which there is no proven vaccine or treatment. U.S. President Donald Trump and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi held their first meeting since early 2025 at the G7 summit in France on Wednesday, discussing trade deals and the safety of Indian sailors in the Strait of Hormuz. Trump called Modi a, quote, tough negotiator and said he would visit India in the future. The two leaders last met in February 2025, but ties have since deteriorated over high U.S. tariffs on Indian goods and Washington's closeness with India's rival, Pakistan. Relations were further strained by killing of 3 Indian sailors in the U.S. Navy attacks on commercial ships. Modi told Trump the safety of Indian seafarers in the Hormuz region was of utmost importance and should receive priority in implementing the Iran peace agreement. Soccer superstars Lionel Messi and Erling Haaland and Kylian Mbappe all scored in Tuesday's World Cup matches. Messi scored his first World Cup hat-trick in Argentina's 3-0 win over Algeria, drawing level with the tournament's all-time record scorer Miroslav Klose on 16 goals. The Argentine scored his first World Cup goal on the same date 20 years earlier when he was 18. Meanwhile, Mbappe netted twice in France's 3-1 win over Senegal to become his country's all-time top scorer with 58 goals. Haaland and England's Harry Kane also scored 2 goals in their opening games.
Many of us will need to stay prepared for both the heat and passing showers again today. The first heat advisories of the summer have been issued for parts of Daegu and Gyeongsang-do provinces. Then scattered showers are expected for most of the inland areas with 5 to 40 millimeters expected along with thunderstorms. Then this afternoon, Seoul and Daegu will be getting up to sizzling 32 degrees Celsius. Chuncheon and Daejeon will make it to 31 degrees. Meanwhile, the capital area will be under sunny skies with very strong UV rays. Some welcome news. The hot weather will ease with nationwide rain on Saturday, bringing much needed cooler conditions to the country. So please hang in there.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.